Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Rush Nation, welcome back to the 5 Yard Rush flagship show. Unfortunately, Murf and Dan, they're not here today, but I have got you covered with a little Week 15 review, and I'm delighted to be joined by the host of the Fantasy Coaches podcast, editor of the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, and a writer over here at 5 Yard Rush for the Dynasty team with his weekly Dynasty Risers and Fallers series, which is great. So get on over to the Dynasty guys and check that out. At Dynasty_analyst on Twitter, Emerson Beery. What is going on, man?
Oh, doing fantastic. Just watched my Chiefs yesterday battle with the Houston Texans in a much tougher matchup than I anticipated. Had a little Christmas dinner with my family because we're celebrating a little early this year. And then, Mondays are usually it's off from my real job. So this is when I knock out all my fantasy stuff. So just getting rolling today, digesting all the information. How's your weekend go? How was your weekend, man?
Yeah, I mean, Saturday got a lot better when from halftime, really, for the Minnesota Vikings and for me especially. A silly comeback victory, but they got it done. And yeah, like you say, living in the Christmas spirit, done some things with the wife and kids and that. And we're Christmas nuts, as Murf will tell you. Short, like anytime we're absolutely mad for Christmas over here. But yeah. Absolutely fantastic to have you on. Yeah, definitely. You got to get into the spirit, haven't you? But it's great to have you on. And as always, go and check out the 5 Yard Rush Patreon, whatever you want to say it. There's an exclusive WhatsApp chat, a Patron cast with Murf, exclusive to the members. It's as little as £1 a month. I'm not even sure if you can get a can of Coke for £1 anymore. Like, that's how cheap it is. There is bigger subscriptions where you can get all the 5 Yard Rush merch. If you're listening in later, this will be available on all good podcast providers, or you can rewatch on YouTube if you want to see us. But without further ado, let's jump into it with some Week 15 takeaways. Emerson, tell us who you want to chat about first, man.
Well, let's start off with my man. I'm going to highlight later while he's going to be a league winner for you. But I just want to start off Jerick McKinnon, man. Shout out, RB1. Last 2 weeks in a row, fantasy RB1, but overall RB1 last 2 weeks in a row. And yeah, he's just really coming on for the Chiefs just in that Damian Williams-esque way, like a couple seasons ago. Jerick McKinnon's really taken over. Pacheco's been great too. He did have a fumble yesterday that got Ronald Jones in the game for a couple carries. But Jerick McKinnon's taken down that passing down role. He scored that game-winning touchdown on that big play. So yeah, he's been electric. And like I was listening to Matt Kelly this morning. I'm sure a lot of people know he has a very big podcast, the Pod Father, I should say. And I was listening to him, and yeah, just on Player Profiler, and he is literally he has an argument to be the most athletic player of all time. Like especially just on metrics, athletic testing, it's all in the 100th percentile. So he suffered injuries for years and on end. He just had some really bad luck, and now we're seeing him really take over this. Been the guy that we hoped we would see a couple years ago. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that too. I think Jerick McKinnon going to be fantastic these last couple weeks. I think has a great matchup this week, and then he did tear. Denver so supposedly a tough matchup, but he tore him up just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, Jerick McKinnon. He's one of those players. He's had injury woes in the past and things like that, and with Clyde Edwards-Helaire sort of out of the picture, and you got. Especially with PPR leagues, McKinnon is the passing downs guy there for the Chiefs, right? Like, you're a Chiefs fan as it is, but so you see it a lot more than sort of a casual fan, especially a fantasy football player. But he is not only being the RB1 the last 2 weeks, he has actually been very good for the Chiefs. And Pacheco's been great as well, and it was a decent matchup this past week. But like you say, we're talking about league winners later on, but what do you see with this Chiefs backfield as a whole going forward, maybe even into next year? I know you love the dynasty side of the game as well.
I don't know. The future of this backfield, I don't think is on the team necessarily. I think Pacheco's a good back. I think he has a future in this league. He's very explosive. Everyone who sees him run says he runs angry. He runs angry. And that's exactly what he does. He was so fast. He gets 5 yards downfield so quick that, before the defense blinks, he's already at the cornerbacks. I don't think he has a lot of vision and a lot of, moves outside of that. So I just don't know if he's I just don't see him as an elite running back in this league. He has a lot of room to operate though with Patrick. You don't need to be an elite running back when operating with Patrick Mahomes. He is locked into that just kind of work, that first and second down role, but he has had over 80 yards, I think, in all-purpose yards in 5 straight games, over 60 rushing yards in 5 straight games. So he is I think you can count on him as a kind of back end, maybe RB2 with upside the rest of the way. Mckinnon, maybe even more, especially in PPR leagues. Maybe we're getting in the mid-tier RB2 territory.
Yeah, Pacheco's he's a battering ram, isn't he? His yards after contact is great as well. But the next person is someone I was actually intrigued by here, because is it a flash in the pan? Is it just a system or whatever? Tell us about Brock Purdy.
I think we're not going to see Brock Purdy. This is a Gardner Minshew run here. I think defenses, what I really tend to notice in defenses is that they really, it takes them, like when quarterbacks, quarterbacks' best games of their career might be the first games that they get in. When defenses don't have film on them, that's when you see those Gardner Minshew starts, those Tony Romo starts when teams don't know what to do. And so I think he could go on a little bit of run here. I believe he has a good matchup this week. I was just about to pull up his schedule and I had written it down earlier. I thought it was pretty good. Let me see here. Oh, Washington. Yeah, it's not great, but they're 15th in terms of fantasy points given up to the quarterback position. So that's pretty average. And he finishes up in a very nice matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders. So, pretty good schedule coming up here. And he's been a quarterback 2, top 18 quarterback in all 3 performances. Had a quarterback 1 performance a couple weeks ago. So, I think he's just pretty much, you just inserted him right where Jimmy Garoppolo was, pretty much just a kind of a mid-tier to upper-tier quarterback 2 with upside, and if we're talking about streamers this week, and you're looking at the waiver wire, if you don't have one of those top-tier options, I'm assuming probably, in most fantasy leagues, about the top 15, 16 guys are automatically probably off the waiver wire. So, I think he could, he's at rostering. I'm looking at sleeper right now at about 11% rostership on the kind of a standard league format there. So I think you could do a lot worse this week.
Yeah, absolutely. We was talking before we came on air, weren't we, about how we're getting on in our leagues and stuff with the playoffs. And I'll put a claim in for Mac Jones for week 15, but it turns out I had a bye. I didn't realize it, but when you're just going through your leagues and you're claiming whoever, and I claimed Mac Jones because I needed a quarterback. I had Derek Carr as my only other one in a 1 QB league, and then I realized, I got a bye. Fair enough. So I'll put a claim in for Brock Purdy in that league for this week, and potentially for week 17 as well, because he's doing the job, isn't he? Exactly the same as what we expected from Jimmy Garoppolo, and it's arguably one of the QB safest offenses in the league.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, he doesn't need to do a lot. He's just a passer. He doesn't have a lot of rushing upside, but all he needs to do is dump it off to Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, and George Kittle.
Yeah, absolutely. George Kittle and Christian McCaffrey through the roof for these last couple of weeks. But tell us someone else who you're happy with from week 15.
I have Jerry Jeudy as my next man up here. I was just pulling up his numbers for the year so far, and I was a Jerry Jeudy truther from the start this year. And back in April, I always thought I love Jerry Jeudy as a prospect coming out of college. He kind of got done dirty these last couple of years with the quarterback, and didn't get this much better this year actually. I thought he was going to be better than Courtland Sutton. I got bullied into the latter half of the summer. I got bullied into, kind of what everyone else was thinking. Everyone was, beating me down with Courtland Sutton's the number 1 guy in practice. He's Russell Wilson's guy. So I kind of came off of that bit, but I'd always had them fairly close. Courtland Sutton started off hot, but even when Courtland Sutton was healthy before these last couple games, Jerry Jeudy had a lot of games outproducing him. Courtland Sutton was falling into the 3rd option a lot of weeks there. So Jerry Jeudy, 17 targets the last 2 weeks, 15 receptions, about 150 yards. had that 3 touchdown performance against my Kansas City Chiefs. I was at that game. My Chiefs are very soft at coverage, so I didn't take too much from that. But yeah, I think he's all right on par with Sutton. Maybe even you could make it certainly an argument that he's the best wide receiver here. I just don't think Russell Wilson is going to struggle like this next season. What he does the next couple weeks, he does have another matchup against my Kansas City Chiefs in the fantasy football championship in week 17. The LA Rams are out of it, and the defense, without Aaron Donald in the pass rush, it's hard, and Jalen Ramsey, without any pass rush, Jalen Ramsey's been struggling too. So he has a nice setup here the next couple weeks. It'd be nice to see Russell Wilson in there instead of I'm blanking on his name. Ripien. Ripien, yes. Maybe nice to get Russell Wilson back in there, but that might actually give him some top 15 upside. But I think he's a solid wide receiver too the rest of the way here and into 2023. I think he's a borderline top 30 dynasty wide receiver as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I was fully on board, the same as you, with Jerry Jeudy being the 1 and Cortland Sutton being the 2, and then people were saying about how they play and how they line up compared to DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett with Russell Wilson, right? And I was kind of towards, like, when we was close to the season, and I mean, it might have took a bit longer than you, but August sort of time, I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll grab a few shares of Cortland Sutton just in case. And it turns out it's all come from Russell Wilson, and the play calling and things like that there in Denver is why neither of them have lived up to the it was pretty much a high expectation, wasn't it, preseason? What we expected from both of them. And, they were drafted near enough at the same sort of time or the same round, or maybe one after the other, one round before, one round after. And there was pretty much inseparable all through that. But it seems like Jeudy is kicking on at the right time for anybody who has him rostered, and obviously Sutton's hurt and things like that. But yeah, I'm fully in agreement with you. I think Russell Wilson will bounce back next year. This year's done for them pretty much, and you just got to kind of take the rough with the smooth, haven't you? And tell us about another guy who's struggled a bit this year, but week 15 was a bit more kind, maybe. Yeah,
maybe we're seeing a little bit of a positive uptick with the changing of the guard at quarterback here. But Drake London had 11 targets last week. He even had 12 targets with Marcus Mariota before the bye week. So that's 23 targets in 2 games, and it's just the most inefficient targets, that can be, just because it's the Falcons offense and these passes are bad. But yeah, we're seeing a huge monstrous target share. And yeah, I think Drake London, we can insert him back into the kind of flex position in these last couple weeks there. If you drafted him early, you aren't left in the playoffs, unfortunately. But in your dynasty leagues, if you have Drake London, you probably are still there. That didn't hurt you too bad. So I would feel comfortable, especially with multiple flex positions starting Drake London the rest of the way. He's just the only guy left in this offense. They don't like to pass the ball hardly at all, but when they do pass, it's probably going to be to Drake London. And it appears that our new quarterback here definitely understands that a little bit better than Marcus Mariota here, Desmond Ridder. So that's nice to see. So we'll see here. I don't want to make too much out of just one quarterback performance, but Baltimore Ravens have been susceptible to wide receivers this year in terms of fantasy football. Finishes up against the Arizona Cardinals, who aren't that good in that department either. So I would, Drake London has a favorable schedule to finish up here, so I really like him. And, into 2023, of course, the sky's the limit. I think he is right in the mix with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. It is really tough. I have Chris Olave probably ahead of him, and Garrett Wilson and Drake London are right neck and neck for dynasty wide receivers. I think you can make an argument for any of the 3, though.
Yeah, so it's almost like the Falcons knew they had to switch it up a little bit, right? They've lost their last 3 games now. Obviously, Mariota's had an issue and he's gone on IR or whatever, and Ridder's took over anyway. I thought Ridder would take over a lot earlier, and I'm almost certain that Falcons hadn't started as hot as they did. I'm not sure of the record at the start of the season, but I knew they won some games early on. And if they didn't start as hot as they did, well, I tipped Ridder actually to come in by week 6 with Liam, at 5 Yard Dynasty from the podcast. And I said to him at their live draft, and I says, Ridder, it was about the end of the second, maybe his pick was. And I says, Ridder will be in by week 6. And he wasn't in by week 6. And Liam reminds me of that now. But it's like, I'm excited to see the rest of this year what they've got with Ridder and different things that they're going to try. And going back to Drake London, it has to be wheels up from here on out with him. Like you say, a weekly flex play at a minimum. And because he had some good targets and stuff earlier in the season, and then it kind of all just tailed off, didn't it?
Yeah. And you weren't wrong with that Marcus Mariota, take Desmond Ridder, getting benched. Marcus Mariota was not playing well enough to go past week 6, but the team was winning with kind of this running play style. So, got delayed till here, but here we are. I don't know if we have a future passer here in Desmond Ridder, but yeah, it's very interesting to see. Like I said, it definitely gives Drake London possibly a little bit more hope. Poor Kyle Pitts never got it going this year and is on IR and have to wait till next year. But at least we got maybe we'll get to see a little Drake London flashes here before the end of the season.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe the Falcons want to see what they've got when they have Ridder, London, and Pitts next season. Who knows at this point? But yeah, Drake London, he's commanding a lot of targets again. The Falcons ain't running the ball quite so much as they did in previous weeks. And it's good news for Drake London shareholders, definitely. But moving on, it's another running back you want to tell us about.
I'm not even sure what to think about Travis Etienne here. I more was just bringing him on here just to kind of talk myself through it here. It was a tough few weeks for him here. We did see 103 yards. We saw the rushing attempts, man. But one thing that's interesting is, for just the guy who was supposed to be a great pass catch, supposed to be a pass catching running back. He actually is not has not been a pass catching running back all year. He only has 2 games with over 4 targets. So it's just been a little bit disappointing in that regard. He's more of just like kind of in that kind of just a very talented running back and kind of more of that kind of like Nick Chubb kind of, or Derrick Henry-esque kind of style. That's the way he's being used at least. And I think it's because, I've listened to some other people speculate on this, that it just appears that, he's not that great. His hands aren't that great, actually, as it turns out. He does drop his fair share amount of passes, and he doesn't run that diverse of a route tree. So, he's so explosive with the ball in his hands that it tends to be that maybe we overlooked his route running ability in his hands. And, he's great in space. If we're running screen passes for Travis Etienne, that's fantastic. But I don't think that you're ever going to see, at least anytime in the near future, unless we see some development, you're not going to see him in that Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley mold, running wide receiver routes out there and stuff like that. So, so it's something to consider. It's Travis Etienne's dynasty stock, is very volatile. He does have the New York Jets this weekend. It's going to be tough to trust him. It's going to be tough to trust him against the New York Jets. Houston is a fantastic matchup. You'll probably fire him up in the championship if you're lucky enough to make it there. His dynasty stock, though, it's tough to where to rank him because all the older running backs in the league, it's tough to put them ahead of Travis Etienne. But, just knowing that maybe his upside maybe isn't maybe more of like a lower end RB1, up a higher end RB2, actually, it's tough to figure that out. But yeah, I just wanted to chat about just talking myself through that. Actually, it's more of just an open mic, actually, open thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And why not? I mean, he got 100+ yards this week, mostly on the ground. But his big weeks are when he is utilized more in the running game, when he has that high amount of carries and things like that for this season. And it has been. The last few weeks, he's been poor, but he's been against really good run defenses. And I thought it would be a similar story this week. He got hurt, came back in overtime. Obviously, the Jaguars won. But is it because of how good the Clemson O-line is why he looked like a legitimate pass catcher, and maybe like almost what people were saying with the next Christian McCaffrey or the next, maybe is it because of how good Clemson's O-line were?
Yeah, I mean, when Trevor Lawrence is dumping off Travis Etienne screen passes, and then you have these All-American offensive linemen running in front of him, especially, if it's against, college is not the most level playing field. You have fantastic. You have the Alabamas and Clemsons of the world going up against, what basically is a Division II team compared to them on almost a weekly basis. So, yeah, they're going to abuse those type of teams. And so, yeah, I think we just glossed over some things. It does surprise me that Trevor Lawrence doesn't just look for, they just don't have that natural connection that he wants to look for more. And it surprises me that they just don't draw those few screen passes a game to kind of get him the ball, design him a little bit more. But yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, it doesn't have that kind of 3 down. He's out there on the passing down. He's just not catching any balls too. So, I'm not saying it can never happen too, but it's just interesting that, we're a full year in and that role has never materialized yet.
I mean, I missed this comment earlier and I do apologize to Stacey, but he sent a comment in saying he is Purdy good. I'm guessing he was talking about when we was chatting about Brock Purdy, yes, but yeah. Stacey, he's a great guy. Does the waiver wire articles on they're out every Monday morning for 5 Yard Rush. Go and check them out. You find some gems amongst dirt pretty much every week. And yeah, great guy, Stacey. But moving on from Travis Etienne, who have we got next, Emerson?
Juju Smith-Schuster, I got up next here. And, I might just have to mention him later on among the league winners as well, because we saw 3 straight wide receiver 1 weeks in between weeks 7 and 9, I believe, and then we had he had that concussion. There was a bye week. He came back. Well, he missed a game, and then that's what I meant. Not a bye week. He missed a game. Slow in his first couple games back, but then he's really come on these last couple weeks. 21 targets, and he's really getting a lot of work here. He's definitely clear the top wide receiver on the Kansas City Chiefs. That's still behind Travis Kelce in the pecking order, but he's been fantastic. He's really developed a good chemistry with Patrick Mahomes, and I think especially for a guy that you were able to get more of a back end wide receiver 2, mid-tier wide receiver 3, even price tag in August drafts, I think you could see a guy who is going to be probably top 15 wide receiver the rest of the way. Seattle and Denver. They rank pretty high against fantasy wide receivers, but I don't think that means much against the Kansas City Chiefs. So I really like Juju Smith-Schuster the rest of the way. And, Kansas City Chiefs are, they're not going to have a ton of cap room just paying Patrick Mahomes and a lot of these others. So it's hard to see them, getting a top, acquiring multiple free agent wide receivers and through the draft and stuff. And they won't be drafting that highly per usual either. So I think Juju Smith-Schuster has a chance to get a new contract in Kansas City as well. So, sky's the limit for Juju Smith-Schuster going forward. And I think I'll have him as my top 15 play the rest of the season.
It's a real shame when he got hurt because he was getting hot before that. Now, he had multiple 100-yard games and things like that. Great fantasy points, touchdowns, everything. And it's Juju Smith-Schuster of old, because when he was with Antonio Brown and he was the second receiver for Pittsburgh, he was fantastic. He put up a wide receiver 1 season, just outside a wide receiver 1 season. And it's almost like Travis Kelce is his Antonio Brown here in Kansas City. Andy Reid clearly likes him because there's none of them other wide receivers. They drafted Sky Moore. They went and got Marquez Valdez-Scantling and some others. Watson's there as well. But none of them are getting the love like Juju. Like, he had them few down weeks after getting injured, yes, but then he stepped back into that role automatically.
Yeah, and I think that's going to continue. It's hard to see that Marcus Valdez-Scantling's a deep, he's heavily, he runs a lot of routes. It doesn't get a lot of work, though. Doesn't get a lot of targets on those routes. Kadarius Toney, McCole Hardman, these guys are just kind of returning to health. They're going to be hard to count on. I think they'll be a little bit more sporadic production. Those big play guys that can kind of, they'll catch a big play, make a big touchdown every couple games. But I think, I'm a big fan of Juju Smith-Schuster the rest of the way this season. I think you'll see him as a weekly starter going forward.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing even having them hard matchups. When I was talking with Murf on Fast Action Friday, and he says about Zay Jones going into the Dallas game, it's a tough matchup. He's not the wide receiver 1 on his team. He might not even be the second target on his team, but he's on the boundary. Trev will look for him, when he has to move the chains and things like that, save a bit of time on the outside. And look what Zay Jones went and done this weekend. And it's a similar story with Juju for not so much being on the boundary and things like that, of course, but in a tough matchup, it doesn't really matter because he is going to get them looks. He is going to get that volume. And it's from Patrick Mahomes, man. Come on. But it's almost like, for me, with the rest of the Chiefs pass catchers, you throw enough muck and something's going to stick. But week to week, none of us know. For best ball, yeah, it's okay. But it's Travis Kelce, Juju Smith-Schuster, and that is it for me, really.
Yeah, and I think that's all you'll be able to count on in fantasy too as well. So, we're hoping that Kadarius I have some best ball. I do a lot of best ball drafts. So, Kadarius Toney, McCole Hardman, you have some hope for him there. But and besides that, could Juju Smith-Schuster, Travis Kelce. And it's interesting, Kansas City Chiefs running backs have never been able to count on before, but now you might be able to count on 2 Kansas City Chiefs running backs in your starting lineup. So it's just interesting to see this Kansas City Chiefs offense evolve.
Yeah, and talking about running backs, this is one guy that potentially has knocked me out of 1 or 2 this weekend, and I've been really high, and I've been right on the money with him because he's been exactly where I thought. Miles Sanders, tell us a little bit about him from this week, mate.
Yeah, it was just he hardly got any attempts in the first half, and I think he ended up with like 11 rushing attempts. Ended up with 30 or 40 yards there. But man, it just wasn't his week, especially when people were counting on him against in a great matchup. Yeah, it just didn't end up working. He's really it's hard to count on him when Philadelphia is in a more competitive game script. It's hard to count on him. They seem to more give him the workload when they're playing ahead like they usually are. So it was a tough game for him. And especially I was playing him in my cash lineups in DFS this week, and it just didn't work out. We thought Chicago has been really poor against fantasy running backs this year too, so we thought we were getting a great matchup. That's why I was playing him, and it just worked out horribly. So Miles Sanders keeps telling us he loves telling us on Twitter and his mentions that he hates fantasy football and doesn't care about us at all. Well, that's very clear, and but you know what I mean. It's just Miles Sanders is a boom bust guy. You know what I mean. We're going to be down on him this week, and then next week he's going to have a great game. We'll be up on him again. It's really even hard to tell when that game's going to happen. Jalen Hurts opens up a lot for him, so it's more just when he gets these. Last year I think he had 0 or 1 touch. Was it 0 touchdowns on the year or 1? It was one of those 2.
1, I think, yeah.
1, yeah. He had 1 rushing touchdown last year, and he's on the other side of that this year. He has a lot. I'm looking at the page here that doesn't sum it up at the bottom, but he's doing very well in that department this year. So that's what you're kind of looking for. And, Jalen Hurts is as likely to run that in as he is. So you'll see some, when you're looking at him, you see RB 21, RB 11, RB 39, RB 37, RB 2, RB 23, RB 3. And, that's just kind of sporadic up and down. And I think that's what you'll see him the rest of the way. That's what you'll see for him a lot of his career playing with Jalen Hurts and Philadelphia Eagles. I believe he is a free agent after this year.
He is.
Yep, in that Saquon Barkley and David Montgomery class. So they are all on that free agent pool. So, just depending on his situation, we don't know a lot about Miles Sanders going forward. So you kind of have to rank him that way.
You could have drafted him as your 3rd running back if you went a little bit robust. He was like the RB 33 or something by ADP, and he hasn't burnt you because I'm not saying I knew like I'm psychic, but I really thought he would give you that high-end RB2 sort of level throughout the season. And it does turn out from a great week to a not so great week to a good, and that is kind of where he is for the year. And but what are Philadelphia going to do? They've locked up their playoff spot and they're safe and they've locked the division and things like that. When are they going to start resting players? Week 17, maybe, which is a week before usual. That's your fantasy championship.
I hope not.
And this goes the same for Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Devonta Smith. I'm sure Murf will get into this next week, but it's a scary prospect, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage them to look kind of at the history of teams taking an extra 2 weeks, and not playing for 3 weeks with a bye and like taking a month in between. A lot of the time, it doesn't work out that well. So I would, if I was them, I would highly consider at least playing at least a good portion of the game on week 17, and then fully take a full rest week 18 if you need it, because you're gonna get those 2 weeks off. And yeah, it's nice in theory to have a month off, but these players are trying, they're playing in rhythm right now. You get a lot of timing off. It's weird taking off a few weeks just midseason, then firing up in your biggest game of the year right away. So I would highly consider playing, despite the risk of injury in week 17, at least a good portion of the game. But I'm not an NFL coach, obviously, so we'll see what happens in that department.
So what Emerson is saying, ladies and gentlemen, anybody watching or listening in later, we all need to rally round on Twitter and at the Philadelphia Eagles, but don't mention fantasy because they do not like it. You need to play your team because otherwise you're going to lose on your first playoff game, and that is what we need to do. That has come from Emerson there tonight, and I'm all aboard. I'm all aboard.
I love it.
But anyway, yeah, absolutely. But tell us about Deshaun Watson, mate.
I had him as my next guy up here. I just wanted another guy I just kind of was chatting myself out loud about today. He's gotten a little bit better. He took a step forward in week 14, but kind of fell back last week again. This is a guy who looks pretty rusty here. It's just hard to tell. It's just kind of a mixed bag. I kind of thought this might help be. It's really tough. You just put a person in the shoes. You know what I mean? Just taking 2 years off. Just going. It was self-induced, but going through a lot. Whether he did that to himself, but just putting yourself in that shoe. Could you if you were Deshaun Watson, would you probably be just ready to pick it right up off the bat? You know what I mean? So it's not surprising to me to see him struggle. And, it's a wonder, there's a small risk that I think that, maybe he doesn't get it quite back to where he was before. 2 years is a long time. He went through a lot in those 2 years, changing whole different situation in Cleveland with the Cleveland Browns now. So, I tend to think that he does figure it out. I do have him, I believe, as my quarterback 6 or 7 in my dynasty rankings still. But, just this, he certainly hasn't put to bed any chatter that maybe he was going to struggle after this. So, just interesting to see. I'm sure you will get the full Deshaun Watson. I think there won't be any packing it in for next season. I think he will want to try to right the ship and get some some positive storylines going in to the next season. So I think you will see full Deshaun Watson go time the next couple weeks. So we'll see if he can get it together. But I think it's hard to trust him as more than kind of a upper tier quarterback 2 at this point in fantasy football. And for Nick Chubb too, it's a different offense, and I think these guys are kind of trying to learn how to play together. It's tough to see. Nick Chubb wasn't. This offense was going to pass more with Deshaun Watson, so the Nick Chubb, we were counting on him scoring more touchdowns. If he was going to keep up, that same pace. More plays being ran with Deshaun Watson being a better quarterback. We thought more plays would be ran. More, so that would make up for the fact that maybe Nick Chubb wasn't getting as much, there'd be more passing attempts, more touchdown opportunities, hopefully, but that hasn't materialized yet. So it's not surprising to see Nick Chubb struggle as well.
Yeah, I think Stacey might have been, he's in a bit of a dilemma with Nick Chubb because he's bringing him up quite a lot the last couple of weeks. And I completely understand it myself because he's a pure rusher, isn't he? He doesn't pursue that sort of pass catching upside and things. That's what Kareem Hunt was there for. And it's a tough one with Deshaun. Like when I joined Dan on the Flagship show a couple of weeks ago, it was just after Deshaun made his debut for the year, so just after week 13. And like Dan said, he's the one that brought it up, and he said, what did we expect from Deshaun Watson actually? When you look at it, people saying their team got so much better because Deshaun Watson's back and things. But think of it logically. The guy hasn't seen a field for 2 years, pretty much. 500 and something days or whatever. And it's almost like an extended off season, Dan says. And when he put it into simple terms like this, I was like, you're so right. It's unbelievable because it's almost like an extended off season for Deshaun Watson playing these few games. We still see him Brissett in for QB sneaks and things like that. Is it so Deshaun doesn't fully understand all the playbook and everything? Like you mentioned, it's a change of scenery from Houston to Cleveland and everything like that. But it's a funny one the rest of the way. I did have to start Deshaun this week in one league, in a super flex league. So he was my QB2, obviously, and it didn't pan out too bad. But rest of the way forward, like we said about Brock Purdy earlier, he's probably on your waiver wire. He's barely owned in any leagues. I'd start Purdy over Deshaun Watson next week.
Yeah, they'll be close in my rankings. I haven't, worked everything out yet for this week in my rankings yet. I'll do that tonight and tomorrow. But that there has a very good possibility of that this week.
Now, the next guy I absolutely love. I love this whole pre-draft process. I love it now. He's healthy again. He's ticking over. He's electric. And J.K. Dobbins, he is better. I'm sorry, the Ravens are better as a whole football team, regardless of who else is on the field, when J.K. Dobbins is on the field.
Yeah, he's been fantastic these last 2 weeks, 145 yards rushing. He's been very efficient with 8 and over 9 yards of carry. So I don't expect that efficiency to quite continue, but it is nice to see him fully back. This is probably when we could have expected him to kind of get back to full strength anyway, but he came back maybe a little too quick, got hurt, and just missed the next 6 games. But yeah, J.K. Dobbins, if you were lucky enough to have him on your roster and still make the fantasy playoffs, we're rolling now. I think maybe you can have him a mid-tier RB2 the rest of the way. He's one of the more talented, in college, he showed, he's one of the more talented pure runners. He does not get any involvement in the passing game, so that will kind of cap his upside in this league unless that changes dramatically. He going back to his rookie year, never has really any involvement in the passing game, really. So, maybe he's more, if we're looking at where his upside maybe lies, maybe more of a high-end RB2 in Dynasty. It'll be hard to rank him higher than that. But, as far as, and I don't know if he's able to maybe pay off in that ADP. He was getting up there, toward the mid-tier, low-end RB2s. I remember kind of in those August ADPs. So, like I said, maybe it was too late for him to recoup on that value. He probably didn't make it to the fantasy playoffs if you drafted him highly. But if you did, I think you can safely put him in kind of that maybe upper tier, maybe kind of that borderline top 15, 16 play the rest of the year.
Stacey says he's salty about Nick Chubb. And I'm going to message him straight after this and find out the backstory. But yeah, that's brilliant. But yeah, like you say with J.K. Dobbins, he won't repay his ADP, of course, because of missing so much time. But he is at RB2 the rest of the way, especially with Lamar missing a bit of time, because he'll have more of the rushing value in that offense. Definitely, almost with Tyler Huntley under center. And yeah, I really like J.K. Dobbins just as a player. For fantasy football, he's fantastic as well. Like you say, with them yards per carry and things like that, he won't keep it up to that level, but he's very good anyway.
Yeah, and I think I think he's a player. He doesn't look back to full strength yet, so there's still room to improve as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and you can tell that by his carries. Like he's gone into double figures the last 2 weeks, but it hasn't been anything ridiculous. It hasn't been 25 carries or anything like that. It's been 15-ish, maybe a bit lower, and you can tell that through his volume alone. But the next guy on this list now, I was ridiculously high on. I thought he was a screaming value all off season. Tell us about Deontay Johnson.
Those targets were certainly there all year. It just didn't end up working out. Working out with a new quarterback. Just Kenny Pickett and Mitchell Trubisky weren't overly efficient. But just 8 targets, 11 targets, 8 targets, 10 targets the last 4 weeks. And he just hasn't been getting any touchdowns either. Not a single touchdown on the year. So it's just he's just kind of getting that almost DJ Moore kind of style kind of way the last couple of years. Kind of just been in the last 4. He had a midseason lull where it was really hard to trust him, but the last couple of weeks, he's been double-digit PPR points. 9.9 4 weeks ago, so right on the edge. But yeah, double-digit the last 3 weeks, and yeah, I think you can kind of count on him the rest of the way here. He has favorable matchups against the Raiders and Baltimore Ravens. I think that target volume is still going to be there, especially, anytime Trubisky's starting, Trubisky really leans on him. So I'm fine firing him up there. A touchdown would be nice at some point, but, he's kind of just going to be, kind of in maybe that low end wide receiver 2, upper tier wide receiver 3 range just because of volume alone.
Yeah, he's been getting by on the volume alone. And when it almost seemed like, when all of his shares was dipping, so his target share, his targets per route run, everything like that, when that started dropping off because George Pickens was emerging with Pickett, that's when I was worried. But like you say, with Mitch Trubisky, he will go to Deontay Johnson. And, he's a flex player, isn't he? Volume alone from here on out for the next 2 weeks if you're there. But I've got a couple to throw at you now. I want to know your thoughts. And firstly, Mark Andrews. So no touchdown since week 6. Hasn't topped 12 PPR points either since week 6. I know he was hurt and his targets, they've climbed back up there. They have the last few weeks, last 3 or 4 weeks. Are you waiting for him to just explode again? Or?
I mean, you have to start at just the tight end position the way it is. It's unless you have Travis Kelce. I mean, I don't know if you can argue putting another tight end in front of him. Maybe if you're aggressive, maybe you can put Dalton Schultz or somebody like that, or George Kittle. But, I mean, that's still really hard to do at this point, especially if Lamar Jackson is back this week. We'll find out about that, I'm sure, shortly, in the next day or two. But even with Tyler Huntley, maybe you put him at the tight end 3 or 4. But, yeah, you're starting him. If you got him, you probably don't have anything else to do. It's just kind of frustrating. We thought he was in that kind of Travis Kelce kind of, matchup proof, quarterback proof. But instead, he's a little bit closer to the rest of the tight ends, in that pack. So, it's unfortunate. I don't think, it's hard. It's tough to trust him the rest of the way here. You have to, if you're lucky enough to be in the semifinals and the finals. You're not benching Mark Andrews, but I don't feel good about playing him by any means.
Yeah, it's a strange one because last season, them 7 games with Tyler Huntley, his splits per game was significantly better than with Lamar Jackson. And I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago with Dan, like significantly. It was like 2 points a game more he was scoring for fantasy and 2 targets a game more and things like that. The only one that was close was his touchdowns. But do you have to start him? If you've managed to grab a sort of Evan Engram, for example, off of waivers, do you need to start Mark Andrews?
Like I said, it's be really aggressive. And, I'm sure, if you'd have to have some, and I don't know, you'd better be at like a very analytics focus and have some analytics to back it up for that particular week, because man, I would still have a hard time doing that. I mean, I'm more of a start your studs type guy. But I could see where you could certainly consider it, and it's frustrating, but man, that would be an aggressive move. And I probably still, like I said, that'd be an aggressive move, and you'd look like a genius if it worked out right. Especially, I would consider it maybe if Tyler Huntley plays, but if Lamar Jackson plays, I think you got to stick with Mark Andrews.
That's fair enough. And the other one I got to throw at you is Mike Evans. So he hasn't topped 14 points since week 8. Week 15 was his best since then with 13.3 points. The targets are there. The snaps are there. He had 1 down week with only 4 targets. I personally sat him where I could this past week. What are you doing for this next couple of weeks with Mike Evans?
It just depends on where how many flex and wide receiver positions you have. I think you're going to have a hard time finding, 30, 20. He's going to fit in that wide receiver borderline, wide receiver 2 range, that top 25 wide receiver range ish. And I think, so he's probably starting for you. You know what I mean? Unless you're very, very rich in wide receivers or very thin league, smaller league. He's probably starting for you, and you're just hoping for the best. It's not a surprise, I guess, to see, Tampa Bay scoring a lot less touchdowns this year, and Mike Evans has always relied on touchdowns a lot. So it's tough. This is a down year for him. It is also kind of cresting on that kind of age apex too. So, obviously his value will probably drop significantly next year, unless we see some dramatic improvement. So, yeah, but I think for the rest of this year, you're probably, if you are in the semifinals this week, you're probably firing him up. If you have a 3 wide receivers or multiple flexes, you're definitely probably putting him in your lineup still.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Like you say, start your studs, and you would have spent that draft capital to get Mike Evans. But a little look at the injuries from this past week. So it was a surprisingly quiet for probably the first time this year in terms of injuries. But the big one, of course, is Jonathan Taylor. So he left the game right at the start on Saturday against the Vikings and did not return. So he's been diagnosed with a high ankle sprain today. If you somehow weathered the storm and got to the playoffs after drafting JT 101 or 102, he will be done for the rest of the fantasy playoffs. Possible week 8 in return, maybe, but if the Colts are out of the NFL playoffs, which is definitely possible to say the least, we may not see him now until 2023. Now, Zach Moss led the backfield against the Vikings, scored similar points to his running mate, Deion Jackson, though. If you're in a deep hole, you could go and grab one of them, but it's not lovely to say the least, as it's another split share. Although the Chargers in week 16 is a nice matchup for the Colts running backs.
Yeah, it's tough to trust either guy really. Probably RB3s this week. Zach Moss did get a lot more rushing attempts. But it was that's how the game script was going as they were trying to nurse a large lead that they gave up rather quickly. So it's but yeah, I would tend. If I was starting one, I would go with Deion Jackson because I think he'll get the receiving down role and they'll be playing from behind against the Chargers this week.
Especially in PPR leagues with Deion Jackson. He only had one target this week. Obviously, he caught it for a touchdown, but he will get more going forward like he did when JT was last out. But I'll just run through the next few quickly. Travis Etienne, as we've mentioned earlier, he left the game with the Cowboys this past weekend. He's dealing with an ankle issue. He did return in overtime, which seems like good news, but it's one to monitor through the week as they play on Thursday. Colt McCoy into the concussion protocol. Obviously, Kyler Murray's torn ACL. He's out for the year. Arizona are down to their third-string quarterback, Trace McSorley. He struggled, to say the least. That's putting it politely when entering the fray, and he won't be worth an ad. Rookie running back Zonovan Knight, who has more than impressed in the absence of Breece Hall, of course. He's dealing with an ankle issue himself. Again, that's one to monitor through the week because they play on Thursday against the Jags. Caleb Huntley of the Falcons, he is to undergo an MRI today on his ankle. Head coach Arthur Smith, he said it didn't look good. He's only the third option there in Atlanta anyway, but it's likely we won't see him for the rest of the year. And then there's 3 wide receivers, of course, dealing with concussions. You've got Corey Davis, who Robert Saleh said should be good for Thursday Night Football. Denzel Mims of the Jets and Equanimous St. Brown of the Bears are also in the concussion protocol if you have them in any deeper leagues, And that was a hard hit on Equanimous St. Brown, by the way, against the Eagles this weekend. Did you see it?
I didn't. I missed that one. I'm still on the catch up from the weekend here, digesting all the information. I must have missed that one.
Man, jump on YouTube. It was. I was going to say it was a good one, but it weren't a good one. It was a bad one. But yeah, let's crack on with a couple of potential league winners before we wrap up, and let's go back to your boy Jerick McKinnon.
Yeah, I got to talk about him twice. He's so good. I think it's really rare to see. I think I saw still an absurd sub 60% roster percentage on sleepers. So, in most competitive leagues, in most 12-team leagues, is he's going to be taken? Yeah, absolutely. But it'd be it's crazy that you can get this kind of productive running back still on the waiver wire in some leagues. So yeah, I'm really excited about Jerick McKinnon. I think you can kind of fire him up as a mid-tier RB2 the rest of the way here. And as for a guy who you got on the waiver wire at some point, I think absolutely we're going to take that. Going to be a flex, going to be in your flex. Plug him into your flex if you already have a couple backs, or if you were unlucky enough to suffer an injury these last couple weeks to one of your running backs, you're probably not going to get that much of a drop off in production, and it didn't cost you anything. So I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just mentioned a running back that was banged up, Zonovan Knight. Now, he had a tough week 15 against a Detroit team who have held running backs under 60 rushing yards the last 7 weeks now. It was seen as a peachy matchup earlier in the season. It is not for rushers. For pure rushers like Zonovan Knight, it is not a good matchup. Now, we mentioned he was banged up. Going against the Jags on a short week, but it ain't a bad matchup for fantasy running backs. The Jags allowed the 11th most fantasy points per game with 21.6. But he's worth a stash at a minimum because week 17, they face the Seahawks.
There you go.
Now, I'll run a few numbers on the Seahawks since week 8, which is obviously most recent. They've been the worst against fantasy running backs, 30.9 points per game allowed, 139 yards on the ground per game, 4.9 yards per carry, and 9 rushing touchdowns allowed since week 8, including week 8, sorry. But it's a home run hit, isn't it, having Zonovan Knight? If the ankle isn't too bad, he can get out there with some reps against the Jags or even be full speed against the Jags for week 17 for your ship, for your ring.
Yeah, the only thing I would I'm worried about is that Carter is got a higher snap percentage these last couple of weeks. So I'd like to see that change this week. It's hard. I'd like to see, for me to get really confident about that big matchup, I'd like to see things turn around for him a bit this week. So, but I do like that matchup a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. But you've got another one for us, haven't you?
Yes. The last one I'll type up here is Marquez Goodwin. He's been very productive in 3 or 4 performances with over 50% snap share, 2 wide receiver 1 performances in that span. This is more of a deeper league, kind of he's on your waiver wires right now and you can snag him up if you need a flex play, but I really like him the rest of the way here. Tyler Lockett's going to miss the next game or 2. He's definitely not playing this week. And, I'm sure they'll try to get him back out there because they're competing for the playoffs, but it would certainly be a stretch for him to play even the following week. So he's got a really soft matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs this week too, who have been very, my Chiefs are not very good against opposing fantasy wide receivers this year, against the pass in general. So I think I have a lot of confidence in him this week. And I think, he'll probably be in my wide receiver 3 wings, top 3 wide receiver. So you're probably starting him in most of your leagues.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely see it as well for next week without a doubt, especially with Tyler Lockett being out, because he, especially in deeper leagues, he was finding himself relevant anyway with touchdown upside and then the big playability. But with Lockett not there, and we've all seen what Lockett does with his big playability, he'll make 4 catches, but it will be 140 yards and things like that, Why not? If you're against someone who's projected to beat you, do you want to start, for example, Donovan Peoples-Jones, who has been solid throughout the whole year with or without Deshaun Watson? He had Brissett first, obviously, getting you that double figure sort of one, that sort of points, 10, 11 points, or do you go for Marquise Goodwin, who can potentially go off and get you 4 catches for 100+ yards and 2 touchdowns and potentially be that difference maker? I know which one I'd be going for if I was projected to lose.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's the kind of thing you're playing with there. Are you trying to, in your projected matchup for this week, are you projected to win by a lot and you're just trying to kind of nurse a, lead? You're just trying like, man, I just need 10 PPR points to make myself, feel good about a victory. Or are you looking like you're down, you need a big play, you're down a couple players. Yeah, so it just depends on how much upside do you need.
Especially if you're like the 6th seed coming in and then you've caused one upset against the 3rd, and then now you've got the top guy from the league who is 40 points ahead of you per game every week. Go for the smash play, go for the upside, absolutely. And that's great advice for that situation anyway. But that is about that for this week on the 5 Yard Rush flagship show. Emerson, it's been great to have you on, but there is no show next week on Boxing Day, of course. Spend it with your families. Have a great Christmas, everybody. There will be a championship round preview at some point next week from Murf, possibly Dan, I'm not sure. Emerson, tell everyone where we can find you.
I do a weekly show for the Underdog, which isn't available in the UK yet, but hopefully soon, Fridays. I also do, weekly Twitter DFS threads for FanDuel and DraftKings. I do a Dynasty article for 5 Yard Rush, and I do a biggest headlines article for the Fantasy Coaches podcast as well. So you can find me, I post all that stuff on Twitter too. So that's the best place to find it probably. But yeah, you can definitely check it out at thesportsgamblingpodcast.com as well.
Yeah, go and check out Emerson on Twitter. constant content, things he's producing, things he's sharing with other people, all great stuff. And that is that for this week. This will be available wherever you get your podcasts, as I mentioned earlier. But until next week, have a great Christmas and keep rushing.
Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone.